Sir, stop right there. We need to check you.
What's the reason?
Give me your identification.
I can be verified. I'm federal law enforcement on an authorized assignment. Call dispatch or call a supervisor and confirm.
No, ID first.
I'm offering the fastest way to resolve this in public. Verify me.
Lead, we can call it in. He's offering a supervisor contact. That's quick.
Not here. We're moving him.
Okay.
Confirm. Individual Special Agent Jamal Reed, authorized assignment.
All right, okay, we're good. Simple mix-up.
It wasn't a mix-up when verification was offered and refused.
An ICE team led by Agent Nolan Briggs surrounded a black man in the Harborview Convention Center's main concourse and acted like the stop was already solved. They blocked his path, tightened their circle, and started issuing commands like he was a confirmed grab. The man stayed controlled and kept trying to end it the fastest way possible by offering a direct verification route through dispatch and a supervisor. Briggs refused to verify anyway and pushed the encounter towards detention in the busiest, most recorded part of the building. What Briggs didn't know was that the man he was escalating on wasn't a target at all. He was Special Agent Jamal Reed, an undercover federal investigator on an authorized assignment. And this entire moment was being captured on ICE body cameras and bystanders' phones in a packed public space. At this moment, we want to tell you that we're incredibly grateful that you've chosen to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Now, real quick, tell us where you're watching from today, state or country. Drop it in the comments. And if you like stories where accountability comes from cameras, timestamps, and people staying calm under pressure, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Reed stood near a line of vendor banners and rolling suitcases, with people flowing around him like water. Briggs stood close enough to control Reed's space. 2 agents flanked Reed's sides. Another agent hung back, watching the crowd and scanning for anyone moving in. Reed kept his hands visible and told them he was a federal agent working an authorized assignment. He didn't argue about ego. He didn't raise his voice. He gave them options. He told them they could call dispatch. He told them they could call his supervisor. He told them exactly how to verify him fast. Briggs treated that like a trick. Briggs responded like Reed was trying to talk his way out of something, and he kept escalating the control. He demanded compliance first and verification later. He moved the stop from a quick check into a detention posture in public, with dozens of phones pointed at them. Here's the part people miss. The whole story wasn't about whether Reed could prove who he was. It was about whether Briggs would allow verification to happen at all. Before that moment, Reed's day had started like any other undercover job that required being invisible in plain sight. He arrived at Harborview mid-morning, dressed like a regular attendee. No tactical look, no loud confidence, just a casual outfit and a conference badge that matched his cover role. He moved through registration, checked the room schedule, and walked the main concourse once to get eyes on the layout. He clocked where private security stood. He clocked where local police were posted. He clocked where cameras sat above the escalators and near the service hallway doors. His authorized assignment was tied to a federal investigation that touched the convention's vendor operations. Nothing dramatic, no movie stuff. It was the kind of case built on receipts, patterns, and quiet observation. Reed had a scheduled contact window and a location plan that depended on him staying calm and non-threatening. His job was to watch, document, and confirm identities connected to a wider inquiry. He also knew how stops like this could happen. So he carried a clean verification route in his head. Supervisor contact, dispatch process, field office line. He knew which details to give and which details to protect, because undercover work didn't mean he had the freedom to say everything in public. On the other side of the building, Nolan Briggs was running his own mission that day, and he ran it like the answer was always force first. Briggs was leading an ICE team assigned to the area for enforcement operations, tied to tips and follow-ups. That morning, his team got an anonymous call that claimed a suspicious man was near staff corridors, moving between vendor spaces, looking like he didn't belong, possibly using a badge that didn't match. The tip was vague, but it had the kind of language that makes people move fast, especially when the caller sounds confident. Briggs didn't slow down to verify the tip before going hands-on. He treated it like a green light. He pulled his team together and moved toward the main concourse. They didn't coordinate with convention security in a meaningful way. They didn't run a quick check through the on-site liaison before approaching. They walked in ready to control a person first and sort out facts later. One agent on the team, Priya Desai, wasn't comfortable with that approach. She wasn't a speech person. She didn't grandstand. She just asked practical questions the way experienced agents do when they've seen operations go bad. She wanted specifics about what the tip actually said. She wanted a description. She wanted to confirm if the target was supposed to be there. Briggs shut down the caution with urgency and rank. He pushed the team forward, and that's how Reed, an undercover federal agent doing his job, ended up surrounded in a crowded public concourse because someone made a call and someone else decided verification was optional. When Briggs's team made contact, Reed tried to end it the correct way. He told them he was federal. He told them he could be verified immediately. He told them to call dispatch and gave them a supervisor route that would take minutes, not hours. He stayed in place and kept his hands visible. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't posture. Briggs responded by narrowing Reed's options instead of checking them. He took Reed's calm as resistance. He treated Reed's offer to verify as stalling. Desai, standing slightly behind Briggs, looked like she wanted to intervene without stepping on a team lead in front of a crowd. Her body camera captured her tone shifting, the kind of shift that happens when someone realizes they're about to be attached to a mistake. Bystanders noticed fast. The second people saw the agents forming a tight circle. The phones came up. A woman near the food kiosks started recording from close range. A few feet away, someone else recorded from a higher angle near the escalator. You could tell this wasn't one camera. It was many, and it was all happening under bright convention lighting with clear lines of sight. Reed pointed out that they were in public, surrounded by witnesses, and that verification was the fastest and safest route for everyone. He offered the same solution again. Call it in, confirm, and move on. Briggs refused again. Briggs escalated control language into detention steps. He directed agents into positions that cut Reed off from his bag and phone. He signaled for hands-on control without making verification calls. He pushed the stop away from a simple identity check and toward moving Reed out of the open concourse. At that point, the stop stopped looking like caution and started looking like a decision. Here's the part people miss. When someone refuses verification repeatedly, it's not confusion, it's a choice. And cameras don't just capture what people do. They capture what they refuse to do. Reed stayed controlled and kept repeating the same procedural answer. Verify him through dispatch and a supervisor. He didn't threaten. He didn't bargain. He just kept offering the route that would end the stop clean. Briggs treated that calm like a challenge. Convention security started drifting closer, not aggressively, but close enough to be on record as present. People around them slowed down. The concourse flow tightened. You could see the moment the crowd realized this wasn't ending quickly. Briggs then pushed the encounter into the point of no return for the team's reputation. He moved it toward detention anyway, despite Reed giving him multiple clean chances to verify. And Reed understood something in real time. This wasn't about paperwork. This was about control. And Briggs was willing to be wrong in public as long as he didn't have to be corrected. Briggs pushed the stop past a quick check and into a detention posture in the middle of the concourse. He directed his agents to control Reed's movement and treat him like he was already identified, even though Reed kept giving them a clean verification path that would have ended the encounter in minutes. Reed told the team he was a federal agent on an authorized assignment and offered a supervisor contact and dispatch route. He did it the way the trained investigators do it in public. Enough information to verify, not enough to compromise an operation. He also made it clear he would not consent to being moved into a back area while still being misidentified. Desai, one of the agents on Briggs' team, pressed for the obvious step. call it in and confirm. Her body camera captured that she raised verification as a solution, not an argument. Briggs rejected it and kept control-focused instructions going instead. That refusal mattered because it wasn't a missed step. It was repeated. The body cameras caught the sequence. Reed offered verification. Briggs declined. Reed offered again. Briggs escalated again. Phones were already up around them. A woman close to the group recorded steadily from a few feet away. Another angle came from higher, near the escalators. Convention security moved closer after noticing the attention, and the crowd slowed down. They asked what was happening, and Briggs responded by asserting federal authority and dismissing their involvement. Security did not intervene physically, but they stayed within earshot and sightline, which made the stop harder to control through narrative later. Briggs then tried to shift the location. He steered the situation toward a service hallway area where there would be fewer witnesses and less ambient recording. Reed refused to go voluntarily without identity confirmation. He did not become physical. He did not threaten. He kept his stance stable and kept repeating the same instruction. Verify first through dispatch and supervisor. Here's the part people miss. Once a person offers immediate verification and law enforcement refuses, the issue stops being confusion and becomes intent. Video makes that difference obvious. As the agents attempted to move Reed, the crowd reaction changed from curiosity to alarm. People started calling out that they were recording. Convention staff began making calls of their own. The incident was now linked to the venue, not just the agents, and that created its own urgency. Those calls reached the local field office fast. The report wasn't vague. It included the location, the crowd size, and the fact that multiple recordings were already happening. That combination forces escalation in an agency chain because it turns a field decision into a documented exposure problem. Supervisor Marisol Chen was notified and asked a direct question. Had they verified the person's identity yet? Briggs didn't have a clean answer because the verification step had been offered and ignored. Chen ordered the call to be made immediately. This time, Briggs couldn't stall. With the field office involved, the decision was no longer his. An agent contacted dispatch and ran the verification route Reed had provided. Confirmation came back quickly. Reed was exactly who he had said he was. Special Agent Jamal Reed, undercover, authorized assignment. The moment that confirmation landed, the detention had no procedural cover. The team had to release him right there, in the same concourse where they had surrounded him. There was no way to reframe it without the cameras contradicting them. Their own body cams matched the bystander footage, and dispatch logs anchored the timeline. Reed didn't argue for an apology in the moment. He went straight into preservation mode. He recorded the key times. When contact began, when he first offered verification, when Briggs refused, when the field office got involved, when dispatch confirmed, and when he was released. He identified the closest witnesses who had been filming and made sure names and contact details were captured. He also coordinated with convention security to ensure they documented the incident from the venue side, including which staff were present and which cameras covered the area. Then he moved on the body camera issue immediately. He made formal preservation requests through the proper channels, so the footage couldn't be quietly overwritten under normal retention cycles. He secured copies of bystander recordings directly instead of relying on posts or social media clips, because he wanted original files with intact timestamps and metadata. Desai's Bodycam became a key piece because it showed internal warning and refusal. It established that the option to verify was raised on scene and dismissed anyway. Briggs tried to treat the outcome like a simple mix-up and end it there. Reed didn't. He understood what the evidence now showed. An anonymous tip was treated as certainty. A black man was detained in public without basic verification. And the only reason it ended was supervisor intervention after outside pressure. Within hours, clips from the concourse were circulating, not because someone edited a story around it, but because the raw sequence was hard to explain away. Multiple angles showed the same thing. Reed offered quick verification routes early, Briggs refused to verify, the stop escalated anyway, and the release only happened after the field office was pulled in. Convention staff filed their own incident notes because it happened on their floor, in front of their cameras, during a major event. Bystanders shared recordings with timestamps. Reed didn't rely on the internet version of the story. He built his own evidence package. He logged the timeline in plain order. First contact, first verification offer, each refusal, the attempt to move him off the concourse, the point the field office became involved, the dispatch confirmation, and the release. He attached the preservation requests he made for body camera footage. He secured original files from bystanders who filmed close enough for clean audio. He collected witness contact information while memories were fresh. Then he escalated it through formal channels. Reed filed complaints through the appropriate federal processes and then filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. The case didn't depend on opinions or interpretations. It depended on recorded steps. The central claim was simple. The team had repeated chances to verify identity fast, refused anyway, and detained him without lawful justification once verification was offered and available. Briggs's side tried to frame it as a good faith stop based on an anonymous tip. That defense would have been stronger if the team had verified quickly and made a correction. The problem was, the footage showed the opposite. The recordings didn't show confusion. They showed refusal. Here's the part people miss. In court, what destroys a defense isn't usually the original suspicion. It's the moment someone is offered an easy, professional way to confirm facts and chooses not to. Discovery pulled in everything Reed expected. Dispatch logs, internal call records, body camera retention data, and supervisory notes. Reed's legal team didn't have to guess what happened. They lined up the timestamps across systems. Every time Reed offered a supervisor route, the body cams captured it. Every time verification was dismissed, it was recorded. The longer Briggs delayed the call, the weaker his position became, because the delay wasn't tied to safety or logistics. It was tied to control. Desai's footage became a key piece. It showed internal awareness that verification was available and sensible. It established that the refusal wasn't a misunderstanding shared by everyone on scene. It was a decision driven from the top of that team in that moment. As the case moved forward, the short-term consequences started landing before the trial. Briggs was pulled from frontline operations while internal review ran. The team's actions were reviewed against policy and training standards. The agency issued statements that avoided admitting fault but emphasized professionalism and procedure. That didn't stop the footage from shaping public understanding. People didn't need a press conference to interpret what they watched. Reed also faced real-world fallout that wasn't just legal. Undercover work depends on anonymity and routine. A public stop in a convention center, filmed at close range, created exposure risk. His agency had to evaluate the operational impact, adjust assignments, and document the disruption. That became part of damages because it tied the unlawful detention to real professional harm, not just embarrassment. When the trial arrived, it wasn't built around dramatic testimony. It was built around sequence. Reed's attorneys walked the jury through the concourse timeline in clean segments. They didn't argue feelings. They showed the offers to verify, the refusals, and the escalation. They matched body cam audio with bystander videos to confirm the same statements were captured from different angles. They then anchored the ending with dispatch confirmation timing, showing how fast it ended once someone finally followed the verification route Reed had offered from the start. Briggs testified and attempted to justify the detention as necessary for officer safety and investigation integrity. The problem was the recording showed Reed staying controlled and offering verification that reduced risk, not increased it. The jury was left with one question. If verification was available and would resolve the stop quickly, why refuse it repeatedly and detain anyway? The defense could not give an explanation that fit the record. The verdict came back unanimous for Reed. The judgment was $10 million. The award reflected not just the unlawful detention, but the documented refusal to verify, the public nature of the incident, and the foreseeable professional damage caused by exposing an undercover agent in a crowded venue. After the verdict, consequences moved fast. Briggs' career ended. He didn't get reassigned quietly. The case record was now public, time-stamped, and tied to a jury finding. The agency also faced pressure to address the team culture that allowed verification to be treated as optional. Disciplinary actions hit multiple levels. Not just the lead decision-maker, but supervision and training structures that failed to prevent the behavior or correct it earlier. Then came the reforms, because the case created a template that administrators couldn't ignore. Policy changes focused on 3 areas. 1, mandatory verification triggers. If a stopped person claimed law enforcement or federal affiliation and offered a supervisor or dispatch route, agents had to initiate verification promptly, unless a specific documented safety threat made it impossible in that moment. 2, supervisor oversight. Detentions based on anonymous tips in crowded public spaces required supervisor notification and documented approval when verification was available and refused. 3, longer camera retention. Body camera footage tied to stops, complaints, or identity disputes had to be retained longer, with automatic preservation flags when supervisor involvement or dispatch verification occurred. Reed didn't treat the outcome as a trophy. He treated it as a line in the sand. He returned to his work with a stronger set of protections for people who get misidentified and pushed around because someone decides control matters more than truth. And that's the point of this story. Like when someone offers a clean, professional way to verify, and the person in power refuses, the refusal becomes the story. Cameras don't just capture mistakes. They capture choices. So here's what we want to ask you. If you were standing in that concourse and you saw a stop escalate, while the person kept offering a simple verification route, what would you have done? Would you have filmed, stepped back, called venue security, or tried to find a supervisor? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever been in a situation where you had to stay calm while someone tried to push you into a box that didn't fit, share what helped you hold your ground. And if you want more stories where accountability comes from receipts, procedure, and people refusing to be bullied into silence, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.
Hey, hold up. Who are you and why are you in here? Let me see your ID.
I'm here for an appointment. I have my military ID and my orders. Tell me what you
Keep
need.
your hands right here. I said I have ID and orders. Turn around. You're being detained.
Detained for what?
Grab me. I'm not resisting. I'm trying to comply safe.
2 U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police officers thought they could treat a black man in full Navy dress blues like he was lying about who he was, put hands on him in a packed medical center lobby, and talk their way out of it afterward. What they did not expect was that the man they were pushing around was Senior Chief Andre Calloway, an active-duty Navy SEAL who stayed calm, stayed compliant, and still ended up taken down and cuffed, while strangers started recording from every angle. And before we get into how fast this spiraled, we want to tell you this clearly. We're incredibly grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Now, quick question. Where are you watching from today, city, and state? And if you watch these stories because you believe accountability matters, hit like and subscribe, because this one shows exactly what happens when cameras, policy, and public pressure collide with bad policing. This happened at 6:30 a.m. inside the Savannah area Veterans Affairs Medical Center. Early morning, low traffic, people checking in for appointments, staff starting their shift. The place ran on routine and quiet urgency. And in the middle of that, 2 officers turned a basic contact into a use of force scene in front of patients and employees with phones up and body cameras, capturing more than they meant to capture. Senior Chief Calloway arrived the way disciplined people arrive. Early, prepared, he had his military ID on him. He had travel orders on him. He wore full navy dress blues because he was moving through official stops and wasn't dressed to look casual. He wasn't loud. He wasn't looking for attention. He was focused on getting where he needed to go. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police officers in that lobby had real authority in that building. They could stop people, question them, detain them, and escalate quickly if they claimed a security reason. And in a medical setting, most people don't push back. They comply fast because they're there for care, not conflict. That's the imbalance in places like this. The uniformed officer controls the pace, and the patient usually tries to disappear from the problem. That morning, Officer Derek Walsh noticed Calloway and moved toward him first. Officer Evan Krieger stayed close behind, positioned like backup. The contact began as a standard approach. Walsh demanded identification and wanted an explanation for why Calloway was there. Calloway complied. He kept his hands visible. He didn't argue. He indicated he had identification and orders and was prepared to show them. But Walsh's tone shifted fast. It stopped sounding like verification and started sounding like accusation. He treated Calloway's calm like it was suspicious. He kept pressing even as Calloway moved to provide what was requested. Krieger watched the exchange and stayed close enough to step in if it turned physical. This is where the power game starts. An officer decides early whether he is going to accept information or try to dominate the person giving it. Walsh chose domination. He talked over Calloway's answers and acted like the proof wasn't going to matter. The lobby noticed. A receptionist looked up. A patient in the seating area stopped what they were doing. A veteran near the entrance focused in, watching the officers instead of Calloway, like he'd seen this kind of posture before. A bystander started recording from the side. Then another phone came up from farther back. That changed the math immediately. The officers weren't just controlling one person anymore. They were creating evidence in front of a room full of witnesses. Body camera audio later captured the most revealing part. While Calloway was complying and prepared to present documentation, biased remarks were made, suggesting the officers believed his uniform and identity might be fake. It wasn't careful verification. It was disbelief pointed in one direction. Then Walsh escalated physically. He moved from questioning into force. Calloway didn't strike. He didn't threaten. He didn't resist. He stayed compliant. Walsh still drove him into a takedown in the middle of the lobby and put him in handcuffs. Krieger stayed involved and close enough to stop it, but he did not intervene to prevent the takedown. At 6:30 in the morning inside a Veterans Affairs Medical Center, a black Navy SEAL in dress blues ended up on the ground in handcuffs, while multiple people recorded. The room shifted. People reacted, but most didn't feel safe stepping into it directly, not with U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police officers controlling the scene. The phones kept rolling anyway. That mattered. Calloway stayed controlled after the cuffs went on. He kept his movements minimal. He kept insisting, through measured behavior and steady compliance, that he had what they demanded from the beginning. He didn't give them a reaction they could use to justify what they already did. And Walsh, trying to hold the scene like he owned it, didn't seem to realize the story was already leaving the building through other people's cameras. The moment the supervising sergeant walked into that lobby, the whole temperature changed. Not because people suddenly felt safe, because everyone could tell this was the first person in the chain of command who understood what was happening in real time. 2 U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police officers had put a compliant man in military dress blues and handcuffs in public with multiple phones recording and body cameras running. Walsh tried to control the narrative immediately. He stayed close to Calloway and kept acting like the cuffs were routine. Krieger hovered nearby, quiet, letting Walsh do the talking, the kind of posture officers take when they want to look involved without owning decisions. The sergeant did not match their energy. He did not come in loud. He came in procedural. He looked at Calloway first, not like a suspect, but like a person who needed the situation stabilized. Then he looked at Walsh and Krieger and made them explain what legal reason they believed they had to detain him. Walsh gave the usual officer framing. He tried to make it sound like uncertainty, safety, and verification. But the scene in the lobby did not match that explanation. Calloway had not been running. He had not been yelling. He was not trying to leave. He had been doing exactly what a person does when asked for ID. The sergeant then did what should have been done before anyone put hands on him. He instructed Calloway to present his documents. Calloway produced his military ID and his travel orders. Clean, immediate, no story, no attitude, just proof. The sergeant reviewed them carefully but quickly, like someone who had looked at enough identification to know what he was seeing. He verified the information against what the officers claimed they were unsure about. The timeline, the identity, the legitimacy. It took minutes. That was the moment Walsh's position collapsed. Because once the documents were verified, the entire justification for the cuffs evaporated. There was no longer any argument for continuing the detention, and the lobby had watched the whole progression. The sergeant ordered the handcuffs removed. Walsh hesitated in that subtle way officers do when they know they went too far but still want to appear in control. The sergeant did not allow the hesitation to turn into delay. The cuffs came off. Calloway stood up calmly, adjusted his uniform, and stayed composed. No celebrating, no big reactions, just control. The people recording caught that too, and it mattered. When someone is treated like a threat and responds with discipline, it makes the force look worse, not better. The sergeant then separated the scene the way a supervisor does when he realizes a situation is now a liability. He directed Walsh and Krieger away from Calloway. He placed himself in the middle. He asked for the basics again, but this time it was about documentation, not dominance. While that was happening, the bystanders kept filming. The phones didn't go down just because the cuffs came off. Some people were speaking quietly to each other, comparing what they just saw to what they had seen before in that building. And you could tell this wasn't isolated in their minds. It fit something familiar. The sergeant recognized that, too. He didn't try to stop people from recording. He didn't posture for the cameras. He focused on containment and reporting. He contacted command staff immediately. Not later, not after the shift. Right then, while the incident was still fresh, while everyone was watching, while the officers were still on scene, and the evidence was still running. He also made it clear that all footage needed to be preserved. Body cameras, lobby cameras, any available hallway feeds, any radio traffic, and any reports tied to the incident. That decision was crucial because the first way departments protect bad behavior is by letting time and poor documentation blur the story. This time, that didn't happen. Command staff treated it like a priority because it was already becoming one. Even before news outlets touched it, the incident had the two things agencies fear: multiple angles of video from the public and audio from body cameras that would not sound good in any review. The department removed both Walsh and Krieger from duty pending review. That step did not happen quietly either, because people inside that building saw the shift in posture. They saw supervisors taking over. They saw the two officers no longer controlling the space. Calloway's chain of command was notified. That is the part a lot of civilians don't realize. When an active duty service member is involved, especially someone traveling under orders, it doesn't stay local. It becomes official and it becomes shared across systems that do not care about local excuses. The fallout started the same day. Internal Affairs opened a case. Not a casual complaint review, but a formal investigation, because there was no clean way to explain a forceful takedown and handcuffing when the person had been compliant and could prove identity within minutes. Because Calloway was military, and because the incident involved credibility issues around his identity and orders, NCIS was brought into the loop. And because this was a use of force incident with racial bias indicators and no valid basis for detention showing on its face, it drew federal civil rights attention. This is where the story stopped being about a bad morning in a lobby and became a test of whether a federal facility's police department could be held to the same standards it expected everyone else to follow. And while Walsh and Krieger tried to lean on the usual defenses, the problem was simple. The evidence was already preserved and the public already had it. Once the department locked down the footage, the case stopped being about opinions and started being about timestamps. Internal Affairs pulled the full body camera files from Walsh and Krieger, not clips, the entire recordings. They also requested the Veterans Affairs Medical Center lobby cameras, hallway feeds, and any audio tied to radio traffic. At the same time, they began collecting witness names from the lobby staff and patients who had been there at 6:30 a.m. And because Calloway was active duty traveling under orders, and the incident involved officers questioning the legitimacy of his identity, NCIS was brought in as a partner on the review. A federal civil rights investigation also opened because the detention happened in a federal facility, the force was significant compared to the situation, and the body camera audio included biased remarks that went beyond normal verification. Investigators rebuilt the incident in a straight line. They looked at what triggered the contact, what Calloway did in response, what officers claimed they saw, and what the video actually showed. They compared that against U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs police detention standards and use of force policy, including what officers were required to articulate before moving to physical control. The biggest problem for Walsh and Krieger was that the decision to escalate did not match the evidence. Calloway's behavior on video showed compliance. He stayed in place. He did not attempt to flee. He did not threaten. He did not make aggressive moves. He indicated he had identification and orders and was prepared to provide them. The public videos from bystanders backed that up from different angles, and the lobby cameras confirmed the spacing, the timing, and the officers' positions. Then investigators focused on the officers' stated reason for continuing the detention. Walsh's explanation leaned on vague suspicion, as if uncertainty itself was enough. But investigators pushed it to the legal standard. What specific objective facts supported detaining Calloway in the first place? That is where the case fell apart. There was no credible safety threat, no reported crime tied to Calloway, no evidence he was trespassing, and no behavior that justified forcing him to the ground. The biased body camera remarks made it worse. The audio captured the officers treating his uniform and identity as inherently doubtful in a way that didn't line up with routine verification. It wasn't a careful check. It sounded like they were looking for a reason to disbelieve him, even while he was giving them exactly what they demanded. That mattered for two reasons. First, it helped explain why verification did not happen before force. The officers had already decided he was not legitimate. Second, it put the incident into civil rights territory, because the disbelief tracked to identity and race, not to conduct. Investigators then reviewed the force itself. They evaluated the takedown and handcuffing against the level of threat present. With no active resistance, no flight, and no safety risk visible on the footage, the force was ruled unjustified. The handcuffing was also ruled improper once it was clear the detention itself had no valid basis. Then they looked at Krieger. Krieger did not initiate the takedown, but the footage showed he was close enough to see what was happening and had the opportunity to intervene. Policy required intervention when force became excessive or unlawful. He did not step in. He stayed with Walsh and helped to maintain control after the takedown instead of stopping it. That is why investigators cited Krieger for failing to intervene. The investigation also looked at what happened after the incident, because that's where officers often try to repair the story. Investigators compared written reports to the footage. They flagged contradictions in how Walsh described Calloway's behavior versus what the video showed. They also noted how quickly the narrative shifted once the supervising sergeant verified the military ID and travel orders. The sergeant's verification timeline showed that the truth was available early, and the escalation happened anyway. As the case grew, the department had to deal with two realities at the same time: internal policy violations and external scrutiny. The administrative actions came first. Both Walsh and Krieger were removed from duty during the review, then terminated once findings were finalized. Their law enforcement certifications were either revoked or suspended, depending on the specific authority involved in credentialing, because the violations went beyond a bad judgment call and into misconduct tied to unlawful detention and improper force. Supervisors were not spared either. The investigation reviewed prior complaints and prior use of force concerns tied to the same officers. It found failures in earlier oversight, including instances where warning signs should have triggered corrective action but did not. That resulted in discipline for supervisors connected to prior inaction. The department could not credibly frame this as a single bad moment if earlier patterns had been ignored. By this point, the incident was already public. Bystander video had spread, and people recognized the uniform, the setting, and the tone. The department was forced to preserve and disclose more information than it would have in a normal complaint case, because multiple agencies were watching and the public had enough footage to challenge any watered-down explanation. What started as two officers treating a man like he didn't belong ended as a formal record stating the detention had no valid basis. The force was unjustified. One officer failed to intervene, both lost their jobs, and leadership faced consequences for not acting sooner. Once the investigations ended and the terminations became official, the department tried to treat it like a closed chapter. But for Calloway, the real issue was never just the firing. It was what happened to him in a public federal facility on camera while he complied. So he filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. The case centered on a simple claim. He was detained without a valid legal basis, forced to the ground without justification, and handcuffed despite compliance, while officers made biased remarks questioning whether his uniform and identity were real. The lawsuit also targeted the department's supervision failures, because the investigation had already documented prior warning signs in inaction. The department's attorneys had one problem they could not solve with careful wording: the footage. Multiple bystander videos showed the public view. Lobby cameras showed the spacing and timing. Body camera audio captured what the officers said while they thought they were in control. And the supervising sergeant's actions created a clear reference point, because he verified Calloway's military ID and travel orders quickly and ended the detention immediately. That timeline made it hard to argue this was a reasonable mistake. As the case moved forward, Calloway's legal team did what good civil rights teams do. They made the story procedural and measurable. They focused on the decision points: why the contact started, what facts were present, what the officers did next, and what policy and law required at each step. They treated it like a checklist the officers failed. The department tried to defend the officers' choices as uncertainty and safety, but the evidence didn't support that. No valid basis for detention meant the force had no foundation. And the failure to intervene finding against Krieger narrowed the department's room to argue it was just one officer acting alone. Then the federal oversight pressure increased. When a case has clear video evidence, a formal finding of unjustified force, and civil rights implications, agencies start making decisions based on risk. A trial would have meant sworn testimony, public cross-examination, and deep discovery into training, complaint history, supervision, and past incidents. It would have pulled command staff into the spotlight, not just the two officers. That is when the settlement discussions became serious. The case ended in a multi-million settlement. The money was part of it, but the bigger impact was what the settlement forced the agency to do next. The department was pushed into stricter oversight and accountability reforms tied directly to what went wrong in that lobby. They tightened use of force review. They strengthened body camera compliance rules and consequences for missing footage or delayed uploads. They expanded training around detention standards, bias indicators, and how quickly verification becomes a pretext when an officer already made up his mind. They also increased expectations for intervention, because Krieger's failure to step in became an example of how harm happens, even when one officer is driving and the other is just going along. They also had to address supervision. It wasn't enough to punish the two officers. The findings had already shown that earlier inaction helped create the environment where they felt comfortable escalating. The reforms included stronger early warning tracking, more consistent review of complaints and force patterns, and clearer discipline when supervisors ignore repeated problems. Inside the building, the changes were visible over time. Officers became more careful about articulating reasons for stops and detentions. Supervisors became more involved early when a situation started drawing attention. Body cameras became less optional in practice because everyone understood what happens when policy and reality don't match. And staff and patients became more willing to record because they had seen proof that recording could matter. Calloway's personal outcome wasn't framed as a victory lap. He didn't need validation from strangers to know what happened. What mattered was that the official record matched the reality. The officers were removed, and the agency was forced to change practices that created the harm in the first place. That is the part people miss when they watch incidents like this. Accountability is not just a firing. It's the full chain of consequences. Evidence preserved, findings documented, careers ended, certifications affected, supervision questioned, and procedures changed. So the next person isn't left alone in the same situation. Now here's the question for you watching. If you were in that lobby, would you have recorded, spoken up, or stayed quiet because it was a federal facility with police present? And if you've ever been in a situation where you stayed calm and someone still escalated on you, what did you do afterward to protect yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story hit you, share it with someone who thinks recording and oversight don't matter. And make sure you subscribe because this channel is going to keep telling the stories where dignity holds the line and accountability actually shows up.
What's the reason you stopped us?
I'll explain.
First
ID for both of you. Why are you parked here?
We'll provide ID, but tell us what violation you're investigating.
We've had break-ins back here. That's why I'm checking.
Understood. Do you have a description from a call, or is this just a check?
Just do what I'm telling
We're
you.
asking so we can comply safely. Tell us when you
Well,
want us
what's
to
that
reach for
equipment
ID.
in there?
This isn't just about a routine traffic stop gone wrong. It's about a rookie officer, two undercover agents, and a moment of mistaken identity that ignited a high-stakes legal battle, forcing an entire police department to face accountability. You won't believe the immediate regret felt by the officer or the explosive aftermath that led to a major lawsuit. A brand new patrol officer thought he had finally caught two plainclothes criminals sitting in an unmarked sedan late at night. What he did not know was that the two black people inside that car were undercover internal affairs agents running an integrity operation, and every second of his high-confidence stop was getting recorded, logged, and preserved for review. At this moment, we want to tell you that we're incredibly grateful you've chosen to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. And quick question before we rewind, where are you watching from right now? What state or country? Drop it in the comments. And if you like stories where arrogance meets accountability, hit like and subscribe, because this one is a textbook example of how one bad decision turns into a lawsuit, an investigation, and footage the whole city ends up seeing. By the time the body cam caught the clearest angle, Officer Evan Mercer already had the sedan boxed in with his cruiser, spotlight burning through the rear window. He stood off to the driver's side with his chest tight, his voice loud, and his hand hovering too close to his holster. He was not treating it like a normal contact. He was treating it like he was stepping into a headline. Inside the sedan were Agent James Brooks in the driver's seat and Agent Darius Coleman in the passenger seat. They were internal affairs. They were working late, watching a separate target tied to a ghost overtime scam that had been draining the city budget for months. They were not looking for trouble, and they were not there for Evan Mercer. But Evan Mercer had not been trained to recognize the difference between suspicious and unfamiliar. he had been trained to control. James kept both hands visible. Darius kept his hands visible too. Both moved slow and deliberate, because they knew exactly how these stops went when the wrong officer decided the situation was bigger than it was. Evan started issuing commands that went beyond anything needed for a parked car contact. He demanded immediate identification, demanded an explanation for why they were there, and demanded they answer questions that had nothing to do with any traffic violation. He spoke like refusal itself was a crime. James complied with what was safe to comply with. He gave him the basics he could give without exposing an ongoing operation. Darius stayed quiet longer, watching Yvonne's hands, watching the angle of the flashlight, watching how fast the situation was moving from a question to a confrontation. Evan read their restraint as attitude. He pushed harder. He told them they were matching a description from recent break-ins. He said the vehicle was suspicious. He said the location was known for crime. But when he tried to explain what he actually saw, it was thin. A sedan parked near closed businesses. 2 people inside, engine running, lights off. Late hour. That was it. He did not have a traffic violation. He did not have a confirmed description match. He had a hunch, and he had adrenaline. James asked what law he believed they had broken. He asked it calmly, the way someone asked when they were trying to keep things from escalating. Evan did not answer with a statute or a clear reason. He answered with more commands. Darius shifted his attention to documentation. He did not announce it. He did not reach suddenly. He just made sure the body cam audio, the timestamps, and the sequence were going to matter later, because he knew a pattern when he saw one. The officer who could not explain a stop was the officer who tried to force compliance to cover the gap. Then Evan made the first choice that changed everything. He keyed his radio and described the stop like it was a high-risk situation. He told dispatch he had a suspicious vehicle potentially connected to burglaries, and he said the occupants were not cooperating. That single broadcast did 2 things immediately. First, it wrote a story into the system before the facts were there. The moment he labeled it high risk, every responding unit would arrive expecting danger, not a misunderstanding. Second, it locked Evan into his own narrative. Once he sold it as serious on the air, backing down would feel like losing. Dispatch asked him for details, description, indicators, the reason he believed it matched. Evan gave vague answers, then repeated the same points. Suspicious vehicle, refusal to cooperate, possible burglary suspects. James offered him a simple off-ramp. He requested a supervisor. That was a normal request. It was also the correct request, because this stop should have been cooling down, not heating up. Evan treated the supervisor requests like a challenge to his authority. His posture tightened. His voice changed. He began framing their questions as defiance. Darius watched that shift closely because that shift mattered. When officers escalated after a person asked for a supervisor or asked for the legal basis, it often looked re-James-tory on video. It looked punitive, and it was hard to justify later. Evan stepped closer to the sedan. He moved his light inside the car, sweeping the cabin like he was searching for a reason. In the center area, he noticed equipment that did not look like normal personal items. It was not a gun. It was not drugs. It was not burglary tools. But it was enough for him to decide he had been right all along. He pointed his light at a pouch, a small device, and a wire that looked like an earpiece. He demanded to know what it was. James kept her answer controlled, giving the least detail possible. He was still trying to preserve the integrity operation. He was still trying to avoid blowing cover. He was also trying to keep Evan from doing something that would force her hand. Evan escalated anyway. He told them to unlock the doors. He told them to keep their hands exactly where he wanted. He repeated his demand for IDs. James did not refuse to identify herself forever, but he could not expose sensitive credentials in the middle of a street with backup units rushing in, a target nearby and her gear visible. Darius knew that too. He also knew Evan was not entitled to an unlimited fishing expedition just because he felt nervous. Evan did not hear any of that. He heard delay. He heard caution. He heard the word no even when no one said it. Then he reached for the door handle. This was the moment that would become a problem later, because he did it without consent and without a clear safety justification that matched what he had actually observed. On camera, it looked exactly like what it was: an officer trying to take control of a situation he could not legally support. James stayed still. Darius stayed still. They did not make sudden movements. They did not argue to win the moment. They let the record build. Evan opened the door and she started ordering the driver out. His commands moved fast. He was now acting like he had probable cause, even though nothing new had happened, besides his own growing certainty. And right as he started pulling the stop into a full detention, the first set of backup lights hit the end of the block. The temperature was about to spike again, and Evan had already told everyone on the radio that he was dealing with dangerous suspects. Backup rolled in fast because Evan Mercer had already sold the stop as high risk on the radio. That mattered. When officers arrived expecting a burglary crew, they didn't come in with calm curiosity. They came in with speed, angles, and hands ready. Evan didn't correct the framing when the first unit pulled up. He didn't say it might be nothing. He didn't downgrade the call. He doubled down. He positioned himself like the lead on a felony stop, talking louder, moving sharper, acting like escalation was the same thing as control. James Brooks stayed steady in the driver's seat, hands visible. Darius Coleman stayed steady in the passenger seat, tracking the sequence like a checklist. Evan ordered both occupants out, not as a request, as a command, and he did it without building a clean legal foundation for why a parked, unmarked sedan became a detention-level event. James complied. He moved slow. He stepped out exactly the way officers are trained to want people to step out when they claim officer safety. He did not posture. He did not argue. He gave him no excuse. That should have been the end of the tension. It wasn't. Evan immediately moved into a pat-down. No clear weapon indicator, no furtive movement captured, no bulge call-out, no articulable fact beyond late night, and they won't tell me everything I'm asking. He treated his suspicion like evidence. Darius stepped out next. Same controlled movement, same compliance, same calm. Evan's backup watched the scene like they were watching suspects, because Evan's radio story had already primed them. You could see it in their spacing and their posture. Their attention wasn't on de-escalation. It was on securing bodies first, sorting facts later. And then Evan made the decision that turned a bad stop into a civil rights incident. He put James in cuffs. He called it temporary. He framed it as, until I figure out what's going on. He used the phrase, officers love when they're about to do something they can't justify later, for safety. But cuffs are not a casual pause button. Cuffs are a level of force and a level of detention that demands a real legal basis. Evan didn't have it. James stayed composed because he knew exactly what this would look like on camera. He requested a supervisor again. He asked for the reason for cuffs. He did not shout. He did not fight. He did not give him an excuse to reframe her as resisting. Evan responded by tightening the scene, not loosening it. He cuffed Darius next. Now he had two calm, compliant people in handcuffs, with no contraband, no weapon discovery, no traffic offense, and no clear probable cause. And the longer that took, the worse it got for him. Once they were cuffed, Evan did what officers often do when they feel the stop slipping. He went searching for something to justify what he already did. He moved back to the sedan. One of the backup officers stood near the open door while Evan started looking inside. Not a quick glance for safety, not a protective sweep based on a specific threat. He was probing. He handled items. He shifted a pouch. He looked for identifiers. He shined light on equipment and treated unfamiliar like illegal. That was another problem. You don't get to search a car just because you're uncomfortable. And you don't get to handle someone's gear because you want to find a reason after the fact. Darius watched closely. He didn't need to say much. The video would say it for him. Evan kept asking questions that weren't required for the stop, and when he didn't get the answers he wanted, his tone turned more punitive. The shift was subtle but clear. This wasn't, "What's going on here?" It was, "You're going to cooperate because I said so." And then came the mask off moment, the one line that later made the whole stop look worse, not better. Evan made it clear that their refusal to answer extra questions was the reason he was treating them like criminals. Not a crime, not evidence. There are boundaries. That's when it stopped being a misunderstanding and started looking like regemestion for not submitting. One of the backup officers, newer too, asked Evan quietly what the original violation was. Evan gave a weak answer again. Suspicious vehicle. Recent burglaries. They matched the vibe. They wouldn't explain themselves. That quiet question mattered because it showed even backup couldn't see the legal foundation. Dispatch came back over the air with no confirmation of any description match tied to the sedan. Nothing connected the plate to a burglary alert. Nothing came back that justified cuffs. Evan ignored that off-ramp too. James asked again for a supervisor. Darius asked for a supervisor. They did it calmly and they did it repeatedly because they were giving the department a chance to correct the error before it turned into a full disaster. Evan finally requested a supervisor, but not as an "I need guidance." He did it like he needed someone to validate him. And while they waited, Evan tried to control the narrative. He told the backup officers that the subjects were being difficult. He made it sound like they had done something to earn the cuffs. He repeated the implication that they were connected to burglaries, even though he had nothing concrete. Meanwhile, James and Darius stayed exactly where they were placed, standing cuffed at the front of the cruiser, compliant and silent, except for the necessary requests. Supervisor, legal basis, and preserving their safety. This is the part people misunderstand when they watch stops like this. Calm doesn't mean powerless. Calm is strategy. Calm is how you don't give someone a reason to escalate further. Calm is how you let the evidence speak. A few minutes later, the shift supervisor's unit turned into the lot. Sergeant Edward Delaney stepped out, walked into the scene, and immediately saw the problem. 2 people cuffed. No visible contraband. No active threat. No urgent crime scene. Just a rookie officer running hot and trying to justify it in real time. Delaney asked Evan for the reason, the exact articulable facts. Evan started explaining with the same vague points. The time of night, the area, recent break-ins, the parked sedan, the refusal to answer. Delaney didn't argue with him in front of everyone, but he didn't look convinced either. He asked for IDs. James and Darius stayed careful. They did not want to blow an ongoing operation in the open. So Delaney tried the next step. He called it in. He asked dispatch for more detail. He asked if any unit had a confirmed suspect description that actually matched these people or this car. And while Delaney worked through the basics, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, stepped away slightly, and answered. That call changed his face immediately. Because it wasn't patrol. It wasn't a captain. It wasn't the watch commander. It was internal affairs leadership. And the message was simple. Those 2 people were theirs. The stop was interfering with an active operation, and Delaney needed to end it immediately. Delaney turned back toward the scene. Evan saw the shift in his posture before Delaney said anything. You could see it on the body cam angle. Evan's confidence draining out, replaced by the sudden realization that the worst possible people had just been unlawfully detained by the newest officer on the shift. And right there, before the cuffs even came off, Evan started changing his tone. Sergeant Edward Delaney came back from the phone call with a different face and a different urgency. He didn't need time to think. He didn't need to hear both sides. He already had the only fact that mattered. The 2 people in cuffs were internal affairs, and the stop had already crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Delaney immediately took control of the scene the way supervisors do when they're trying to stop a situation from getting worse. He directed Evan Mercer to step back. He told the backup officers to relax their posture and stop treating the detainees like active threats. Then he moved to James Brooks and Darius Coleman, confirmed their identity in a way that didn't involve flashing credentials to the whole parking lot, and told them he was ending the detention. Evan's body language changed on camera before the cuffs even came off. The command voice dropped, the posture softened. He started talking fast, trying to explain instead of control. But the record was already built. Delaney ordered the cuffs removed. James and Darius didn't celebrate. They didn't taunt. They stayed calm because calm is what keeps the focus on the facts. They asked for the names and badge numbers of everyone on scene. Delaney understood why they asked and didn't fight it. Evan tried to justify the stop one more time, leaning on vague points again. Time of night area, recent bulletin, occupants being evasive. Delaney pressed him for the specific, articulable facts that supported cuffs and a vehicle search. Evan didn't have anything new to offer. He had feelings and assumptions, and he had already acted on them. Then came the moment that ended any chance of this being handled quietly. Evan tried to reframe what happened. He suggested to Delaney that they could write it up differently. He floated the idea of calling it a welfare check, or a suspicious vehicle contact, or anything that would make the cuffs and search look like a normal precaution instead of an unlawful detention. That was the second scandal, because it wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was an attempt to rewrite the mistake after the fact. And the problem for Evan was simple. Bodycam audio doesn't care what someone wishes happened. Dispatch logs don't change because someone got embarrassed. The radio call he made, the way he described the situation, the way backup responded, the moment the door opened, the handcuffs, the search behavior, the tone shifts, everything had timestamps. Delaney didn't agree to Evan's reframe. He shut it down and told him to write exactly what he did and why he did it. He also told him, in front of witnesses, to stop talking and stop making it worse. James and Darius did one more thing before leaving. They told Delaney, procedurally, that the department needed to preserve all recordings tied to the incident. That included Evan's body cam, any backup body cams, the cruiser dash video, and every radio transmission. That mattered because the first move in many cases like this is accidental gaps, late uploads, missing clips, dead batteries. James and Darius didn't leave that door open. They left the scene and immediately informed their chain of command that the operation had been compromised and that they had just become plaintiffs in a civil rights incident. And Evan stood there with the quiet kind of panic that doesn't look dramatic but feels like a floor falling out from under someone. He had spent the whole stop trying to prove he belonged. Now he was going to be used as an example of what happens when a rookie plays high-risk cop without the legal ground to stand on. The department couldn't bury it, not with internal affairs directly involved and the evidence already locked in multiple systems. By the next day, Delaney had submitted a supervisor memo outlining what happened and why he ended it. IA opened an internal investigation immediately, not just into Evan's stop, but into the bigger issue it exposed. How often officers were allowed to escalate based on vibes and radio storytelling instead of facts. Evan was interviewed quickly. His report didn't match the video in key ways. He described more threat than the camera showed. He described more resistance than the audio captured. He described the equipment like it was suspicious tools, but he still couldn't articulate a crime. That mismatch became the center of the internal case. Within the week, James and Darius retained counsel. The notice was straightforward and clean because it didn't need to be complicated. They alleged unlawful detention, false arrest, unreasonable search, regemestion, policy violations, and municipal liability. And then the public side caught up. The story first spread inside the department, then outside it. People talk. Someone heard that a rookie had cuffed IA. Then someone filed records requests. Then a local reporter asked about the incident. The department tried to slow it down with ongoing investigation language. but the existence of footage was already known, and the pressure built. When the Bodycam video finally released, it didn't need narration to look bad. It showed a stop that started with weak reasoning and turned into force because the officer wanted control more than clarity. It showed a radio call that exaggerated the threat level. It showed a search that looked like justification hunting. It showed cuffs applied to calm, compliant people. It showed multiple off-ramps ignored. And it showed the moment Evan tried to change the story after learning who they were. That last part mattered to the public more than anything else because mistakes can be corrected, but backpedaling on camera looks like intent. The city's legal department saw it the same way. They didn't want a jury hearing that audio. The lawsuit didn't need dramatic courtroom scenes. It needed receipts. In deposition, Evan was walked through the stop step by step. Every claim he made was compared to the video and the dispatch log. He was asked to explain his actions. Then the policy manual came out. Not the vague, be professional sections. The parts about articulation, detention limits, use of handcuffs, searching vehicles, calling a supervisor, and truthful radio traffic. Those policy excerpts were used like a measuring tape. The camera showed what happened. The policy showed what should have happened. The distance between those two was the case. The department moved fast because they had to. Evan was taken off the street during the investigation. Depending on how the department handled it formally, he either resigned before termination or was terminated after a disciplinary process. Either way, the outcome was clear. He wasn't staying in a uniform. Delaney didn't walk away untouched. Supervisors don't get to pretend they didn't see what happened once it's on record. He was cited for supervisory failures and how the stop was allowed to escalate before he arrived, and for not shutting it down sooner once the warning signs were obvious. His discipline wasn't the same as Evans, but it was enough to signal the department wasn't calling this just a misunderstanding. The city settled the lawsuit. Cities do that when the video is strong, when the policy violations are easy to explain, and when the cost of trial is higher than the cost of change, and change was part of it. The department updated training and field supervision rules. Internal Affairs used the incident as a case study because it showed exactly how small decisions become big violations. Weak stop, louder commands, a radio narrative, a search for justification, cuffs as a control tool, and then an attempt to rewrite history when reality hits. This wasn't a story about a single bad stop. It was a story about a mindset. A rookie wanted to prove himself, and he treated fear like evidence and paid for it. Now let me ask you, if you were in that car and you stayed calm while an officer escalated without a legal basis, would you have known what to request and what not to do? And if you were the supervisor arriving, would you have shut it down immediately or tried to protect the rookie and smooth it over? Drop your thoughts in the comments and share this with someone who thinks small choices on a stop don't matter. And if you want more realistic stories where power gets checked by evidence and accountability, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Hey, let me see your ID. What are you doing right here?
What's this about?
Do what I said. Give me ID.
Listen, I'm not arguing. What is the reason?
This area's got drug issues. Where are you going? Who you meeting?
I'm not giving personal details. What's the legal basis for ID?
Stop resisting.
A patrol officer decided a black man standing near the curb outside a crowded train station had to be involved in drugs. He walked up and demanded identification right away, without explaining a legal reason. The man didn't argue or raise his voice. He just asked what this was about and whether he was being detained. The officer didn't answer that clearly. Instead, he started acting like the questions themselves were a problem, and he kept tightening the situation until it turned into a public detention with phones recording from a few feet away. And before the story goes further, thanks for spending your time here today. Tell everyone where you're watching from in the comments, your state or your country. And if you watch stories about accountability, body cameras, and people staying calm while someone tries to push them around, hit like and subscribe. Now here's how it started. It was midday outside a commuter station that stayed busy all day. People were coming out of the doors in waves. Cars pulled up to the curb and left. Buses stopped, opened, closed. It was loud and fast, the kind of place where nobody expects an incident until one starts happening right in front of them. Andre Lewis was standing near the curb because he had an assignment. He was a federal agent on an active surveillance operation. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't approaching strangers. He wasn't doing anything dramatic. He was positioned where he could see what he needed to see without drawing attention. He kept his phone low and checked it like any other commuter. Officer Tyson Mercer saw Andre and made an assumption. Mercer didn't walk up like he was checking on someone's welfare. He walked up like he had already decided what Andre was. He moved into Andre's space and demanded ID immediately. Andre stayed calm. He didn't give long explanations. He didn't volunteer details. He kept it short on purpose because he was trying to protect an ongoing operation. He asked basic questions about why Mercer needed ID and whether he was free to leave. Mercer didn't like that. Instead of stating a clear reason for the stop, Mercer began trying to pull information out of Andre piece by piece. He pressed for where Andre was going, who he was meeting, and why he was standing there. Andre kept it minimal. He didn't get sarcastic. He didn't raise his hands in the air. He didn't posture. He just didn't play along. That's when Mercer changed how he described Andre's behavior. Mercer started treating short answers as suspicious. He acted like Andre was being difficult, even though Andre was standing still and speaking normally. Mercer's tone got sharper. He stepped closer and began giving more commands. People around them started noticing because Mercer was turning it into a scene. Commuters slowed down. A few stopped and watched. Some moved around them to avoid getting close. One bystander, Maya Rios, took out her phone and started recording. She didn't run up. She didn't scream. She just held the camera steady and kept both of them in frame. At the same time, Mercer's body camera was running. Mercer then moved toward a frisk. He justified it as a safety step, even though nothing about Andre's behavior had changed. Andre didn't swing, he didn't jerk away, he didn't try to run. He stayed controlled and asked what Mercer thought he was doing and what the reason was. Mercer took those questions as a challenge. He started talking like Andre was refusing commands, even though Andre was staying in place. Mercer put hands on Andre to control his position. He told him to stop moving and stop resisting, even though the video would later show Andre wasn't fighting. Mercer acted like he needed to gain control of someone who was already calm. The public part got worse fast. More people stopped. More phones came up. The curb lane backed up slightly because drivers slowed down to look. Mercer escalated again and went to handcuffs. He pulled Andre's hands behind him in full view of the station entrance, the sidewalk traffic, and the phone's recording from close range. Andre had been trying not to reveal who he was. He didn't want to flash credentials. He didn't want to compromise the surveillance. He didn't want attention on that spot. But at that point, the attention was already there. The detention had already disrupted the operation, and Mercer was already committed to making it look like Andre was the problem. Andre stayed steady, but he made a decision right then. If Mercer was going to keep going, Andre was going to force a supervisor response. Andre stayed calm in the cuffs, but he stopped playing the regular stop game. The detention had already pulled attention to the exact area he was working, and Mercer was still acting like he could keep tightening the situation until something stuck. Andre did two things in order, and both were deliberate. First, he made it clear he was not going to physically fight Mercer. No sudden movements, no arguing, no attempts to yank away. He kept his body still because he knew what officers sometimes write later when a stop looks bad on video. He wasn't giving Mercer anything to twist. Second, he forced the stop out of Mercer's control and into supervision. Andre told Mercer he was a federal agent and that Mercer needed a supervisor immediately. Mercer didn't accept that at face value. He treated it like another story. He kept Andre in cuffs and tried to keep the situation on the sidewalk instead of letting it become a supervisor scene. He pushed for details right there, in public, like he could make Andre prove it without changing his own posture. Andre didn't start explaining the operation. He didn't start naming people. He didn't start giving out sensitive info in front of commuters holding phones. He repeated the request. Supervisor now. Verify credentials properly. That's when Mercer made another mistake. He tried to talk over Andre and control the narrative for the crowd. The body cam captured Mercer using resistance language again, acting like Andre's calm questions and requests for a supervisor were a refusal to comply. Meanwhile, Maya kept recording. She didn't stop when the cuffs went on. She adjusted her position slightly to keep the frame clear. She captured Mercer's stance, Andre's posture, the cuffs, the surrounding people, and the fact that Andre wasn't pulling away or fighting. And you could see it in the crowd. The mood changed. At first, people assumed the officer must have a reason. But when they watch someone stay calm and still get cuffed while asking basic questions, the assumptions start cracking. A few bystanders started speaking up, not yelling, but asking what Andre had done. Others just recorded. Mercer called it in. That radio call mattered because it locked in Mercer's story early. Once an officer says certain things over the radio, it's harder to walk them back later without someone asking why the language didn't match the video. Within minutes, Sergeant Daniel Hart arrived. Hart didn't come in with the same energy as Mercer. He came in with the look of someone who knew this could go bad for the department fast. He took in the scene before speaking, cuffs on, multiple phones out, Mercer talking like he was defending his actions, Andre standing still. Hart separated the conversation. That was the first sign he wasn't going to let Mercer keep running it. Hart spoke to Mercer briefly, then turned to Andre. Andre didn't perform. He didn't try to embarrass Mercer for the crowd. He kept it professional and kept it short. He identified himself again and presented credentials in a controlled way, not flashing them around for every phone camera. Hart didn't just glance and nod. He did what supervisors are supposed to do when something is sensitive and potentially high liability. He verified. He checked credentials properly and made the confirmation call. That verification flipped the entire situation in real time. Hart's posture changed. Mercer's posture changed. The air around them changed. Because now this wasn't an officer investigating suspicious activity. Now it was a patrol officer who had detained a federal agent without a clear reason, on camera in public, while the agent stayed calm the whole time. Hart ordered the cuffs removed, and that moment was caught on everything. Bodycam, Maya's phone, and at least a few other bystanders. The same hands that put the cuffs on had to take them off. The same officer who acted certain had to stand there while his supervisor corrected him in front of a crowd. Andre didn't celebrate. He didn't throw it in Mercer's face. He adjusted his wrists, took a breath, and immediately checked his surroundings because the surveillance assignment was already disrupted. He was thinking about what damage was done and what had to be reported. Hart kept it controlled. He didn't yell at Mercer on the sidewalk. He didn't create a bigger scene than necessary, but he also didn't treat it like nothing happened. He watched the recordings being made. He knew the department couldn't pretend this was a normal stop. Mercer tried to explain himself. He referenced suspicious behavior and implied he had concerns before he demanded ID. But the problem was simple. The cameras showed the order of events. Mercer demanded ID first and tried to justify it afterward. The crowd heard it. The phones captured it. The body cam captured it. Hart ended the street portion quickly. He instructed Mercer to disengage. He spoke to Andre in a lower, more controlled way, confirming that Andre was free to leave and that the department would document the interaction properly. Andre left the immediate area not because he was satisfied, but because he had to deal with the operational fallout. His assignment was compromised. His presence was now known, and the station area had just been turned into a public incident. By the end of that day, there were already two versions of the story forming. One version was what Mercer would later write: a suspicious person, evasive answers, officer safety, resistance, and a detention that made sense. The other version was what the cameras captured: an officer making an assumption, demanding ID without a clear reason, escalating when he didn't get the answers he wanted, and using forced language while the person stayed calm. And the difference between those versions was going to matter, because this wasn't just a complaint anymore. This was a documented timeline with multiple recordings and a supervisor on scene who verified exactly who had been detained. By the next morning, this wasn't just a bad stop. It was a file with a timeline. Maya's video showed the start clearly. Mercer walked up and demanded ID right away. No clear reason given first, no report of a crime in progress, no matching description, just a demand. Then pressure when Andre didn't feed him details. Mercer's body cam filled in everything Maya's angle didn't catch. The exact order of Mercer's questions, how Andre answered, how quickly Mercer moved from talk to hands-on, and how often Mercer used the word resisting while Andre stayed controlled. Then other bystander clips surfaced, different angles, same story. That's what made it hard to spin. One video can be argued. 3 or 4 videos from different distances and angles becomes a timeline. And then Mercer wrote his report. The report read like a stop that made sense from the beginning. It claimed Mercer noticed suspicious behavior first, that Andre gave evasive answers, that Mercer feared for safety, and that Andre's behavior forced escalation. It described the handcuffs like they were the obvious outcome of Andre's conduct. But video doesn't care about a narrative. Video shows order, video shows tone, video shows who escalated first. Within days, the department had 2 things on their desk. 1, a clean sequence on camera, and 2, a written report that didn't match it. That's what triggered Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs didn't need to guess what happened. They laid out the footage in a timeline and matched it to Mercer's stated reasons. Every time Mercer claimed something happened before, they checked whether it actually happened before. Every time Mercer wrote "subject resisted," they looked for resistance. They also pulled dispatch and radio traffic. Mercer's wording over the radio got reviewed the same way because those early statements are what officers rely on later when they say, "This is what I believed at the time." Then, the department made the move that happens when they see risk bigger than one incident. They sent it to an outside civil rights review as well. That outside review focused on 2 questions. Was there reasonable suspicion at the start, or did Mercer create justification after he'd already decided Andre was a problem? Was this a one-off or part of a pattern? That second question is how Mercer's past caught up to him. They audited Mercer's prior stops, not just whether he made arrests. They looked at how often he demanded ID, how often he escalated to frisk, how often he used certain language, how often his reasons were vague, and whether his stop data showed a pattern in who he approached and how those encounters ended. The station stop became the example case because it was clean on video. And once you have one example on video, it becomes easier to recheck older stops that were previously just paperwork. Meanwhile, Andre wasn't just dealing with embarrassment. His surveillance assignment had been disrupted in public. A uniformed officer put him in cuffs in the exact area he was working. People recorded his face. The crowd's attention moved right to the location. Whatever low-profile advantage his team had was gone. Andre's agency documented that operational impact. The city's attorneys saw it immediately because it wasn't just hurt feelings. It was measurable disruption caused by an unjustified detention. The settlement talks moved fast for a reason. The evidence didn't leave room for a clean defense. The case ended with a $3 million settlement. Mercer was terminated, and the department had to do something public-facing that looked like more than a sacrifice of one officer. They had to show structural change because the recordings made it impossible to pretend this was just a misunderstanding. So the policy changes followed the same pressure points the videos exposed. reasonable suspicion documentation tightened. Officers had to clearly state the reason for a stop before escalating, and supervisors had to review stops that moved quickly to frisk or cuffs. Stop data audits expanded. The department increased monitoring for patterns: who was being stopped, why, and what outcomes followed. Stops with vague justifications triggered extra review. Bodycam compliance got stricter. Not just turn it on, but your report has to match what the camera shows, with consequences when it didn't. Inside the department, people understood the real lesson. Mercer didn't get in trouble because the public got loud. He got in trouble because cameras made the timeline undeniable, and his paperwork didn't match. Andre went back to work, but the incident followed him in a different way, not as a viral victory moment, as proof that calm behavior doesn't always stop escalation, but documentation can stop the cover story afterward. And Maya's role mattered more than she probably expected at the start. She didn't argue with Mercer. She didn't do anything risky. She simply recorded steadily from the beginning and kept the moment intact. That's why the timeline held. So here's the question for you. If you saw a stop like this in real life, calm person, no clear reason given, quick escalation, what would you do? Walk past, record, speak up, drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, realistic modern situations where the truth is in the details and accountability actually lands, make sure you like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.